Thank you. I'm Andy Statner. I'm a senior fellow here at the Century Foundation. And thank you all for coming tonight to this conversation. For those of you who are new to Century Foundation, we are a 100-year-old startup working to produce policy research that can help spur policy change in the areas of labor, education, foreign policy, and civil liberties. And we have a series of events here at our event space and a series of events we're doing with NYU policy debates. So please, if you're not already signed up to our list, we invite you to continue coming to our events. I'm really excited I want to thank all of our panelists, including our moderator, Teresa Trich, from the New York Times, and if you read the editorials in the New York Times around the economy, Teresa is responsible for that courageous and important voice over the last few years. I've been very inspired, and all of us at TCF have been inspired by the success of the Fight for 15 and the fact that we, as a nation, seem to be really ready to start doing something around poverty wages. And we hope the research that TCF has put out, including the new report by Bill Rodgers that was released last week, really help us to make the case for the minimum wage. And we hope tonight's discussion will put it in a little bit of a broader context of the challenges we know that New Yorkers face in putting enough food on the table consistently for themselves and for their family, and really to think about what the kind of solutions we need here in New York across the country to end hunger in America. And hopefully, interestingly, the labor world and the hunger world don't always communicate. So we hope this will be a chance and some good chance tonight for some questions and discussion from the audience about how these areas intersect. So we do encourage you to tweet the event. We have the hashtags up there, TCF events and raise the wage. And please, if you want to link to ourselves and our sponsor, Hunger Free America, who has helped to sponsor this event. I know many of the staff and volunteers are here tonight. So thank you to Hunger Free America for helping to co-sponsor this event. And just some quick logistic things. The bathrooms are out of this room and to the right, down the hallway through the door. And we will have, please stay for some wine and cheese after the event, which we'll have out in the lobby. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Teresa. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. You have bios in your packets, so we weren't going to have lengthy introductions, but I wanted to briefly point out who everybody is so you can follow the discussion. And we will have about 20 minutes at the end for question and answer. So to my far right is Flavia Cabral, who is a fast food worker and also a leader in the Fight for 15. This is Joel Berg. This is Joel Berg, the CEO of Hunger Free America. Over here, Dan Cantor, the National Director for the Working Families Party. And this is Professor Bill Rodgers from Rutgers. He's an economist and
don't hold that against me, please.
And a professor. He's also the author of the report that is the topic for this panel, which is the the report is the impact of a $15 minimum wage on hunger in America. So I wanted to start out with Professor Rodgers and first just set it up a little bit. At the beginning of his report, he writes that there were 13 million food insecure households in the United States in 2007. That would be before the Great Recession. And as of 2014, which is the latest data available, it's more than 17 million. So the number went way up in the recession and hardly came down at all in the recovery. So that's where we are today. Obviously, over this entire period, the minimum wage has also not gone up. It remains at $7.25 an hour. So yeah, I wanted to ask you first and briefly, explain to us what food insecurity is, how it's different or the same as hunger, who suffers from it, and why is it so high and intractable? And then if you could get the theme going of just what a $15 minimum wage would do for that problem.
Okay, sure. Thank you. First, I want to say thank you to Andy and the Century Foundation and all the other partners for sponsoring tonight's panel, and thank you for also sponsoring the research. This is actually a project I've been working on since, oh my goodness, the mid-1990s. The first sort of draft of or version of this research was presented at a press conference with Senator Kennedy, and his words always have sort of stuck with me around, particularly about the social justice aspects of the importance of really linking minimum wage increases to tangible things like food security. I'm a labor economist by training, and I've been seeing a lot of my colleagues focus so much on the job loss debate. And if you read that the consensus is that the job losses are modest at best, but we need to do more research like this in terms of really looking at the tangible impacts. And so what is food security? The U.S. Department of Agriculture basically administers a survey to about 40,000 households a month, and in particular one month it's called the Food Security Supplement, where they had asked about 18 questions to families or to households. And the reason why I was attracted to these questions is they get at the issue of resources, of do you have enough income to be able to not have to switch from higher cost, healthier foods to lower cost foods. Did they ask questions of the household? Do you end up, are you able to make it through the whole month without having to cut back? They ask adults or parents, are you able to, or are you able to not have to sort of sacrifice your nutritional needs because you don't have enough resources? And food security has been defined by them on a continuum. And what I do in the report is focus on sort of three categories. The first, it used to be called hunger, but there was a panel that asked them to, national panel that asked them to relabel it and call it very low food security, or food security. And that basically means you have major challenges of being able to provide resources, provide food for your family across the year. And then there's what they call low security, and these are the families that are sort of, my sense is they're above poverty, but they're the phrases we call working poor, but they have some intermittent challenges with being able to have enough money to provide nutritious foods for their families. And then there's what we call food secure. And so actually today or yesterday, the Department of Agriculture released the new numbers for 2015, and there was a significant drop, but however, the key point that jumps out at you is it still exceeds the pre-recession level. It still exceeds the pre-recession level. So what does this tell me? It does tell me that it looks as if, the stronger economy we had over the last year, where we're averaging, sort of north of or close to about 200,000 jobs a month, that finally did begin to help families, but we still have this challenge of stagnating or slow wage growth. We still have several, I think it's about 4 to 5 million Americans who are working part-time, but they want to work full-time. They're not getting full-time hours. So with the combination of stagnating wages that aren't keeping up with inflation, and then continued underemployment or involuntary part-time employment, that's creating a sort of a downward pressure on the ability of families to achieve food security. Mm-hmm. And in terms of sort of the report, in terms of the key findings, I simulate what Congressman Norcross's proposal of going to $15 an hour across a series of years. That the punchline there is about 1.2 million households in the U.S. would achieve food security if we were to move to 15. And that does take into account the fact that some states are already starting with minimum wages that exceed the federal 725. Mm-hmm. And when I do this kind of work, I always like to look for consistencies. And what I also find is that households that are headed by minorities, Latinos and African Americans, and single-parent households, they're the biggest beneficiaries of increases in the minimum wage. And just a real two-sentence story on how I do the analysis. It's sort of novel. It's different from what a lot of people have done in the past. But I'm looking at people who live in states where the minimum wage is just higher than the federal minimum wage, and compare them to people in states where it's $7.20, it's $7.25 currently. And the idea here is that, right, what really differentiates people who are in states that are just exceeding the federal, it's not because they have better education, it's not because they're older, and hence they would have higher wages or have a higher income, right? They're very similar. Right? The only thing that differentiates across these two states, one where the federal is the binding, and then the minimum wage is slightly higher set by the state, is the policy. Right? The economies look very similar. The unemployment rates across these two groups look very similar. And as I said, sort of other background characteristics of these people look very similar. So what I think I'm capturing is the impact of policy. So as I said, 1.2 million households would see a benefit, disproportionately minority. We also see that a large share of the recipients or beneficiaries of going to 15 are in the South. And that's always kind of an interesting issue, because when I worked at the Labor Department back in 2000 for the Labor Secretary, one of the things, we would make these maps of the U.S. where we'd show the beneficiaries of minimum wage increases, and guess where they were? They're prominently in the South. But yet, they had representatives who consistently voted against minimum wage increases. So that's something that I think is important to really amplify out of this report, especially in this election cycle. Let me stop there if there's...
Okay, very good.
1.2 of the 17 million?
What's that?
Only 1.2 of the 17 million will go to food security
Right.
at $15.
Yeah, 1.2 million households.
Households.
And that's about a 6.5% drop in insecurity.
Let me go to Flavia. I mean, we have this big overview now, and the number 1.2 million households being raised up to food security if the wage were to go to 15. What is it like in the real world, in the workers that you are working with to fight for 15 in your own household? You have 2 daughters. Describe to us the extent to which these low wages really do translate into, is there going to be enough food on the table? Are the kids getting enough to eat? Am I going to be able to eat after the kids eat? How real and how front and center is this to the workers that you are and that you work with every day?
Yes. Thank you for being, I'm so glad to be here. That way people could listen. This is what happened. I started McDonald's for $7.25 an hour. And it's still not enough for being family to take care of my 2 daughters, my husband. He's right now disability, he's not working. And working for $7.25, only you get a week, $150, almost, because McDonald's have a different schedule. I don't work for 40 hours, 35 hours, 22 hours, still not enough. Like he said, sometimes we don't have no money to put food on the table. Actually, me and my husband overnight, we're going to pick bottles to complete, at least to buy egg, milk, bread, whatever to eat. So it's not enough. It's not fair for people who really working in the United States. It's not only me, it's 1,000 people in the same situation, maybe worse than me. Because that's why I picked 2 jobs. I'm working 2 jobs. One time in the morning, part-time, and part-time in McDonald's, because I don't have a full-time working. So working is the most important for a human being, to bring food to the family, to provide everything they need. We, all these workers being strike, all these workers want to work. We don't want to live from the system. We don't want to go ask the government help us, because we're able to work. We don't want to do those things. We rather to work, bring food to the family, and give us supplies for school, what we need. And we don't ask for just, we just need a decent salary to survive, to live. So it's very hard for all the families to put food on the table. because we pay rent, we pay phone bills, we pay light bills. Sometimes you don't have the money to pay your rent. You have to ask for another week to pay your rent. And if you don't pay in time, they give you a penalty beside that one. They give you a penalty to you to pay more money. So it's not enough money that we're getting. That's why we've been in this strike. I've been 10 times in the strike for help to work together with the people we're suffering, to put food on the table, to pay the school for the children. We don't have no choice. For example, myself, I only finished high school. With what money I'm going to go to college, including my two daughters. One of them dropped school. And the second one, I don't know what kind of future I'm going to give her, because we don't have no saving money. We don't have the credit to go to college. We are in the air right now. So that's why we're fighting for this. We are struggling, and we are keep going and going and going after we get the point. Right now, for all the strike, the politician is helping us a lot. They listen to us. Now we get $10.50 an hour, $10.50. So we hope we get the 15 and a union to provide, to get better life, to succeed, to give a better future to our children. But putting food on the table is very hard. We have to choose between rent, between bills. We're going to say, no, we don't have no money to buy food now because we have to pay the rent. Or we don't have the money to buy bread or whatever because we have to pay the light bill. Sometimes my daughter asks me when I'm going to get a pair of shoes, new one. And I say, when I have extra little money, I could give you. But right now, we cannot. So that's the situation we are right now. Not only me, like I say, it's a lot of people. We don't want to be homeless either. That's why I'm fighting to be working, because I don't want to be in the street. So many people are in the street. Sometimes even being in the street, you're suffering for food. Because you go to the church to ask for food, you go to the, whatever they ask you for food, oh, we don't have money, we don't have. I understand those people. Some people don't take an advantage, some people, they really need it. So that's why, thank you guys for listening. I want, like I say, a dream come true. I don't know if it's going to be true, but I want that dream come true. I want this thing change. It's not only about raising the minimum wage. It's not only about, it's something that we need, that we're working for our respect, for our future, for the children. Imagine if we don't give education to the children, what kind of country we're going to live? With dummies people, we cannot continue like that. We're supposed to keep fighting, and I'm going to keep fighting, and I'm going to keep saying whatever I had to say, whatever it takes. All my coworkers, they say, you don't get scared to get fired? No, I don't get scared to get fired, because I'm saying the truth. I struggle to say the truth. I've been saying so many times. Again, I will say again and again. My coworkers, some of them are younger, dropping in school to help the parents to pay bills. That's not fair. They're supposed to go to school and study to get better job, better life, better future. That's why we need to be changed. That's why we need to somebody keep listening to us, giving us, this program is very good, put food on the table, because it's going to help a lot. It's not like, I want this, I want that. No, we need it. And we need it now. We don't need it next 10 years or next 20 years. We need it right now. We don't need it. Oh, yes, we had the law. We're going to pass the law. No, we need it now. Family is suffering. Family need it. We need to be listened. That's all I ask all the politicians, all that I had to go, whatever. All my coworkers say, everything that we had to do, we're going to do, because it's for our own good. That's why we're calling us, when I do this strike and all the people come with me, we're calling ourselves, we are unstoppable. No one going to stop us. No one. No one going to stop us doing this. We're going to continue doing it and doing it and doing it after we get a decent salary, after we get money to put food on our table. Thank you.
Dan, they need it now.
Yeah.
It is
No,
always
it's not in 10
interesting to me
years.
that it's like we can't go to $15 an hour in 5 years or 8 years. I mean, you would think that people are saying we're going to do it now. Tomorrow you're going to show up at work and you're going to start paying these people $15. Nothing that's even being discussed is help right away. But what is the situation out there in the states and cities, and how can you move it along in the states and cities during this period when it's not moving along in the federal level?
First, thank you, and especially thanks to Flavia. It is humbling to be on the platform with you. So I just wanted to note that. Working Families Party, just for 30 seconds on that, founded in New York in 1998, now active in about a dozen states, basically on the outrageous view that we could do better as a society. That was why the party was formed. We think we could have a more decent and humane economy and ask each other better questions and provide each other with a better life. Here's what's interesting. There's a lot happening on the minimum wage. People are very much aware of this. The Fight for 15 has completely changed the debate in a very short time. The first strike, I think, was November 2012.
Yes.
I remember that morning thinking, this is nuts. We are never going to go anywhere. Nevertheless, I think it was about 200 fast food workers that first day in New York launched that whole thing. And here we are, not even 4 years later. A couple of states have already moved to 15, some cities. Probably Andy or others know the exact numbers, but there are tens of millions of people who now live in states that are on their way to 15. Some of it pretty quickly. I think New York by 2018.
18.
Yeah. Others on a slower timeline. So that part is fantastic, right? Because it is an issue in which Republicans will eventually be forced to yield, but they won't yield fast enough unless there are more courageous fast food workers like Flavia and others to drive this. To me, what's most important about, in addition to, two things are incredibly important. The first thing is what it means to people's everyday lives, as was just made so clear. But what the minimum wage fight is about is, it is a direct and important repudiation of trickle-down economics. That has been the dominant economic frame in America since Reagan, for 35 years. We had a different frame. People with historical memories, the great American middle class was created by two things: unions pushing up and high marginal tax rates pushing down, creating the Great Compression. And that has been entirely lost. The idea of trickle-down, as everyone knows, is if you cut taxes and cut spending and cut regulation, the animal spirits of the entrepreneurial class will lift everybody's boat. Turns out to be an utter fraud. It's not trickle-down, it's a Niagara up. A phrase from a colleague, David Johnston, the former Times reporter on taxes, about how we've had this enormous transfer of income. And the numbers that Professor is citing, you forgot more than we know, but it's just outrageous that here we are in the richest country in the history of the world, and there's 17 million families hungry. I mean, I'm a solid middle class, upper middle class guy. I'm never hungry. I mean, I sort of can't believe it, but I know it's true. So the beauty of the minimum wage is everybody understands it. Even, people who are voting for Donald Trump, I'm sure, poll at 70% in favor of the minimum wage, because it's true every time we poll on it. It's enormously popular. It's a failure on our part and others that we don't. It's not. It's as Joel will tell us, it never makes it into the national debate in a deep way. Not just low wages, but especially the effects of low wages. Right? Flavia puts a human face on it, but when you hear it, it's like, one is ashamed. So when we started WFP in New York, it was 5.25. It was only 18 years ago. It was 5.25 in New York in 1998. Took 6 years in New York State to raise the minimum wage. It wasn't until workers themselves got organized. And it is not like some sort of outrageous wage. $15, $30,000 a year. If you were lucky enough to be working full time. I think in Denmark now, fast food workers are at $20 an hour. They figured it out. It's like the hamburger goes up a nickel. I think as a society, we should say, that's okay if that's what happens. And there are some who will say it doesn't even need to, but regardless. So where it's at, there's a couple of ballot measures where minimum wage is on the ballot statewide. It can sometimes be a useful tool, not always. Minimum wage will pass, and people who oppose the minimum wage will get reelected in the same election. That is to say, our ambitions of forcing elected officials to fall on one side or the other of that doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, but often it does not. Still worth doing, but somehow I feel like we have to take the minimum wage impulse and the morality of it and inject that throughout our politics. That's the only way we're actually going to get not just minimum wage, but the social wage, things that are not in your pay packet, but paid time off. And I always wanted the WFP to be the vacation party. You know, these countries that have vacations, like by law, everybody gets a vacation. I'm betting, I don't know, that you have no paid vacation ever in your life.
Never a holiday either.
Never. Like this. So like 40% of the people in America have no paid time off, no paid sick days, no paid holidays. Those of us sitting in the nonprofit world, 2 weeks off, 3 weeks off, 4 weeks off, whatever, it's unknown.
Don't give my staff ideas.
There we go. But the challenge for us, you know, so Flavia's on the front lines, the social democratic bargain has broken down. The kind of big government, big labor, big business bargain that made such advances in the post-World War II era up through sort of the rise of neoliberalism, of Reaganism, really in some measure of Clintonism in the 90s. That's collapsing. I mean, social democracy has collapsed, and this sort of neoliberalism is collapsing at the same time. What's going to replace it? I leave the professor to tell us, but we definitely need something that is going to say to each other, we don't want people's life chances determined at birth. And that's the country we live in today. And it's a combination of the work that the Century Foundation does at the ideological level, but especially the work that workers do in fast food, in home care, in child care, in all these fast-growing, low-wage industries. And then those of us in politics have to somehow figure out how to inject this and get it in front of voters, because I believe, and I'll stop here, that voters really grapple with this, we will live in a much different country pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Joel, let me bring you into this. I think a lot of people think of poverty as an issue of those who don't work or can't work. That it's a little harder to get your head around poverty among people who work, let alone hunger among people who work. And so with those disconnects happening, or perhaps just the imagination doesn't go there as readily, it's then that much harder to link a political issue and an economic issue like raising the minimum wage to hunger, to poverty. Yeah. But I think that's what you're seeing and acting on every day. Second, so I wanted you to talk about that a little bit, but also, even if we had a $15 minimum wage, we're still going to have a big problem. I mean, he said it's going to be 1.2 million families that will be lifted into food security. And there's, what's the number now as of yesterday?
About 14 million.
And there's about 14 million, so 17 million was old data, my fault.
1 year.
But still, there's going to be, more than 12 million people who still have a problem. Yeah. So again, linking the poverty issue with the minimum wage issue, and then saying even if we did have the minimum wage that we're fighting for, we would still have a big problem. What do we do?
I'd say it's a great question, and it's always startling to me that not just conservatives or apolitical people have misconceptions about poverty. Here in New York, it's amazing how many highly educated liberals or self-proclaimed progressives are absolutely clueless about these issues. And people who are progressive on every other issue, vaguely against inequality and against global warming and gay rights and all those things, really know nothing about our issue. And they have this misperception that the people they see on the street homeless, that's hunger. When the people we see on the street homeless, they're a small percentage of who's homeless. an extraordinarily small percentage of who's hungry. You know, here in New York City, we're redoing the numbers now, and we'll release them in a few weeks, but, you know, as of last year, 1.4 million people in this city lived in households that couldn't afford enough food. There are about 50, 60,000 people sleeping in homeless shelters, and the vast majority aren't substance abusing, mentally ill people. They are poor. And we have this misperception about the permanent underclass as defining poverty. Between 2008 and 2012, I'm not a math genius, but that's 48 months, 4 years times 12, 48 months. About a third of Americans dip below the poverty line for at least one of those months. Only about 3% of Americans were in poverty those entire 48 months. So if you define that as sort of the underclass, you know, 3% of 300 million, that's still a little over 10 million people, but the vast majority of people in facing poverty and hunger are people who have been and will be in the lower middle class. And so I'm writing a new book on American politics that's coming out next February, plug, called America, We Need to Talk. It's also a parody of self-help books. But my central argument is it's been a huge mistake for policy people and a huge mistake for the media to sort of lump poverty and hunger as this distinct other kind of thing that is somehow detached from the collapse of the American middle class. And so that's a key issue to understand. It's also key to understand the interaction between the benefits and the wages. I sit on Governor Cuomo's anti-hunger commission. I see Travis Stampas here from the Food Bank, Margaret Purvis from the Food Bank is chair of that commission. One of the things we pushed for that the governor did is raise eligibility for SNAP to 150% of the poverty line from 130% of the poverty line. And that's particularly important along with the minimum wage increase in the state to make sure that people, as they get that increase, don't lose the benefits. Now, we've calculated that if you go all the way to 15, most people will gain more in wages than lose in benefits, but at these interim levels, particularly if you're a single person that doesn't benefit from the earned income tax credit, then the fact of the matter is you're going to probably lose more in benefits than you actually gain in wages. And so while the Paul Ryans of the world talk about these wage cliffs, they're 1,000% hypocritical about their solutions. All their solutions would make it worse. And in fact, all the conservatives pushing personal responsibility, their actual policy prescriptions, when you dig in, make it worse. And it goes nuts to me when some of me, not the editorial board, but other people, oh, he's very serious, he's talking about poverty. But all solutions would increase poverty. That's like giving someone credit for talking about global warming when all their solutions are about starting more coal plants and saying, oh, they're serious, they're talking about it. And I think the key takeaway to understand is that we saw from these numbers going down because the economy's improving, there's not just some set level of poverty and hunger we just have to sort of accept, and it's just some immutable level based on natural forces of the world. It's human policies, it's political policies that determine whether it goes up or down. In the 1970s, we almost entirely ended hunger in America because we had a more inclusive job, very few working poor people, and a more robust safety net. And it was a bipartisan coalition of George McGovern and Bob Dole that pushed it. And I must say, we're a nonpartisan group, but the claim today that this is a nonpartisan issue is just bunk. The people pushing to cut the safety net are conservatives. The people pushing to preserve it are progressives. Not nearly hard enough are they pushing to do it. So the answer, what we need to do is not only raise wages and above $15 an hour, but we need a more robust safety net. We have to worry about unemployment and underemployment. Donald Trump is wrong about as many things as a human being can possibly be wrong about, and then some. But when he criticizes the unemployment statistics, he doesn't understand why he's saying it, but he's got a kernel of truth. And that really looking at the workforce participation rate, who's really in the economy, is a much better understanding of what the true unemployment rate is. And you see other statistics about inner city people, the gross unemployment rates. Raising minimum wage obviously does nothing for people who are unemployed. Now, it's absolute bunk, the right wing's claim that this is going to hurt jobs and raise prices. And I'll say, if McDonald's claims they can't afford to pay you enough to feed your family, maybe they can trade in their golden arches for some bronze arches. Right. And maybe the executive can stop making tens of millions of dollars a year, millions of dollars a year, and make sure you earn enough to feed their families. So there's a lot we need to do, but we also need, I'll be proposing the next few months, to dramatically remake the safety net, that we stop treating people like criminals and make them jump through 1,000 hoops just to get basic benefits. When a very wealthy person gets the mortgage interest deduction on their second home, they don't have to fill out a zillion forms and prove they're not the 5 other Joel Bergs in the database. I'm sick and tired of low-income people have to wait online for 4 days. At the request of people say they should be working, they have to leave work to go online to get the benefits to provide them ability to eat while working. What was your question? Thank you.
Well, I say one thing.
Yes.
If they have a law to raise the fare, they have a law to raise rent, they have a law to raise food, What happened to the law for the raise the salary? What happened to that law? I'm still waiting for that law. Without asking, without fighting, without, you know, supposed to have a law to raise the family raises, right?
I agree. Although, and we do seem to all agree that a $15 minimum wage would be a good thing, there is a question out there about, is it too high? And it seems that there's two ways to look at it. Some people who think it's too high because the current wage is so low. So they say it's a from here to there problem. It's a big leap. And the people who rebut that say $15, I mean, $30,000 a year, you're going to meet your basic living expenses. That's about where the minimum wage should be. So and there's one other point that you made, that the research shows that modest increases don't have an employment effect, but this would be a pretty big increase from where we are now. So could there be employment effects? So how do we persuasively rebut this argument that 15 may be too high?
Yeah, I think there's several ways. I think one is as more states and municipalities begin and they get out in front of the federal government, and they start to move into these higher territories that you have, like Michael Reich, who I think has done work on New York State, and you begin to show that the sort of the sky is falling, Chicken Little sort of concern. It's just not borne out in the data. I think that's the number one, and I think the other piece too is I've been involved with a group of United Ways in New Jersey, United Way of Northern New Jersey, where we've actually created a family, we call it ALICE, where ALICE stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained and Employed. And it's another way of thinking about living wages, but what we've done is we've gone in New Jersey and throughout the U.S. and the various states and gone at the county level and have estimated the basic budgets. So we've taken food, we've taken health insurance, we've taken child care, and particularly for New Jersey, we find that basically about a third of our households are at or below this ALICE threshold of just basically being able to make ends meet. And so one of the things that we've been doing at the grassroots level is we use our work on ALICE to help really provide our donors with concrete sort of a vision of what the experiences are. We use our ALICE information or ALICE narrative to help when we go into corporations, because that's where still United Way Worldwide receives a lot of its financial support. But then I think the other piece in terms of how, and this will be a little wonkish, but to let you know that there's a tension out there that when you talk about, let's say, going to $10 an hour, pretty much all the liberal economists will be on board, but going to 15, even over these sort of segmented increases, it is kind of sort of broken up some of the liberal economists, where Alan Kruger and others are a little more cautious about supporting going to 15, and then you have others who for whatever reasons they're willing to support going to 15. So that's something that I think our profession has to deal with. I think the way I try to argue that is that sure, we don't have lots of studies out there to talk about to see the true effects of when we go to 15, but if we can focus on the increments, and I understand I would love, and from my work with Alice and our households there, I would love tomorrow and the next day, now let's go to 15, and would provide a great amount of relief and support. But the way I argue is, okay, well, look at the studies. Even though they may be done at lower actual increases, if we focus on the increments, right, and we do these increases in the kind of increments we're talking about, we shouldn't see the job loss that people are so concerned about.
Well, what about there's another source of tension, and let me ask you about this, and it's the tension that if you raise the minimum wage and you're successful in raising the minimum wage, you will undo all the hard fight that people have had to get food stamps, to get earned income tax credit, that somehow even among people who really fight and have fought hard for people in poverty. I see this when I'm writing some editorials. It's like, yeah, that'd be good. Don't say that. You know, don't say that it will save money in the federal budget if you raise the minimum wage, because they don't want a higher minimum wage to be seen as licensed to take back some of these benefits that have been so hard fought.
Yeah, I must say, in all due respect to my fellow progressives who say something like that, they've got to knock on some doors in Staten Island and get a little reality check about this. And they've got to talk to more low-income people. The people you work with, you would be thrilled if you made more money and didn't need public benefits, right?
But we don't ask for, we asking a millionaire company.
Right.
McDonald's is a millionaire company.
Right.
We asking for a little bit more money because they are millionaires.
Right, but from them, you would prefer to get $20 an hour and never need food stamps or SNAP, right?
Exactly.
Right, so they're missing both the conservative or swing voters or middle-class people who are sick of paying for these, and the very same people they seem to be fighting for. And frankly, not to put too fine a point on it, they're clueless about this. If our main argument for being against block grants for SNAP, and believe me, I've spent decades fighting to destigmatize SNAP. You can watch me on Fox using 3 seconds out of context after 5 hours of interviews. So I get the stigma more than anyone. But if our main argument against block granting SNAP and maintaining as an entitlement is that you not need the flexibility for more funding to go into the program when the economy improves, then the flip side of that is you need less money in the program as the economy gets better. And progressives should be championing that as a fundamental victory of sound social policy, and that we should be supporting work as a centerpiece of social policy. So both the people paying for these programs and the people utilizing, who are also the same thing. I'd urge you to look at a column I wrote for Democracy Journal comparing Social Security program to the SNAP program and saying Social Security is far more of a welfare program than anyone wants to admit, just as SNAP is far more of a social insurance program than anyone wants to admit, because the rich are taking far more out of Social Security than they put in because they live longer, and low-income people are paying taxes, paying into this. So my long answer is, man, if we need less spending on SNAP because people have living wage jobs, everyone from Fox to, I'd cite some progressive media, but they're dead, other than the editorial, everyone should be celebrating, not saying, oh boy, we're spending less on, and by the way, we should say that money, spend more on ITC, spend more on education, spend all, we're starved for revenue. So I'm not saying it should just go back to tax cuts for the rich, but if we don't have to feed people because they're earning enough, we can spend money on a lot of other things like universal pre-K, which we should have tomorrow or yesterday.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would also just add that back with our Alice families, what we've found is for each dollar that Alice needs to achieve that, meet her needs in their community, they only have, from work and from support from the government or public support, they only had about 75 cents on that dollar. They had like a 25-cent, this is in New Jersey, had a 25-cent sort of gap they had to plug. And so what I would also add to what Joel said, I would do is I would take the, if you will, the revenue or that's being saved, if you want, I use that in quotes, but I would use that to really address those families that I see in my study, right, that when the minimum wage reduces the very low security, but it's not the only solution. You've got to you have to have a whole set of other approaches or techniques or initiatives that you're addressing these issues.
Okay.
Just to jump in, there's an interesting piece of legislation that is progressing in Connecticut. It's called the McWalmart Bill. And what it does, it says that firms that have more than 500 employees, if too high a percentage of their employees are on public benefits, then the firms have to pay an extra $1 per hour to compensate the taxpayers for having to, in essence, we are subsidizing low wages, right?
Yes.
This is a disgrace. And it's all, I mean, you dig in a little bit and it's just, there's a 10021 Upper East Side, touches 10036, and I think that's the right one, in East Harlem. 13-year life expectancy gap across a zip code line. It's like, everything is related here. We need, it's a big country, and Clinton is saying, I'm for 12, 15 where it's possible. Some of us are unhappy about this. $15 is a political slogan. It's, I mean, we're not making, yes, we think it's good economics, but what it mostly is about saying, we cannot accept this trickle-down framework anymore, right? It's not working. The country just getting more and more unequal, right? You have, what are the numbers, right? The top 400 have as much as the bottom 150 million. Well, it's not a democracy, it's an oligarchy. So there are interesting public policy things to do, a la what I just described and what the 15 is fighting for. But at base, we have to decide, like, what kind of country do we want to live in? And how, not just we want wages, people want to work. It gives you meaning, right? And we also have to have the safety net for people who, for whatever reason, are unable to work. And this is a widely popular, but we have to have the courage of our conviction and put it out there and force. Joel was saying before we started that nothing ever gets asked in any of these presidential debates about poverty. It's like it doesn't exist, right? These are poor people, they're black, they're brown. It's like, they're Americans. We should take it seriously.
So write to Lester Holt and Anderson Cooper and all them, tell him to ask.
Lenny, you brought up the $12 an hour that Hillary Clinton is supporting. So what do people who support 15 do or say to get Hillary Clinton off of this idea that $12 would be okay? Or what I see is an even worse idea, that somehow we might have some kind of two-tiered system. Somewhat like what New York came up with. And in fact, maybe if you could tell us how you got Governor Cuomo to go to 15, we might get some clues as to how we can work on Hillary.
Politics in command. Governor Cuomo was against, he called it preposterous, I believe, was his initial take on $15. Heidi's smiling, and then Zephyr Teachout ran for governor. And it was a near-death experience for our governor. And he decided, oh my goodness, I need to be a progressive. It was similar to what happened with him on the millionaire's tax.
The horror.
The millionaire's tax. This is a good one, right? Because this is the millionaire's tax producing $5 billion. Governor Cuomo decided to let it expire because we don't just tax people because they have money, he said. We have to have things to spend it on, as if we don't have things to spend it on. And he actually went so far as to compare it. He said, I don't care how popular it is to tax millionaires. This is like my father's position on the death penalty. This is a point of principle with me. This got a lot of notice. This, again, was in 2011. And then Occupy happened. There's a direct line from Occupy to the fight for 15 in terms of elevating this notion of, and about 500 people marched down State Street in Albany with a big banner that said, "Welcome to Albany, home of Governor 1%. 2 weeks later, he completely changed his mind about, and revived about half of the millionaire's tax. Didn't really do a good job, but better than what he was going to do. So the answer to your question is, how do you avoid the two-tier, which we're about to have a two-tiered system in New York, right? People who are against it have to lose their jobs or fear that they're going to lose their jobs, right? We're not just going to do this with all due respect. We're not going to white paper people into submission, right? I know you know that, right? Much as we want to, right? Ideas actually, no, the right has invested heavily in the battle of ideas, right? They persuaded everybody that trickle down was good, right? That these government regulations, oh my God, those meat inspectors, we got to get rid of the meat inspectors. I don't know. It's just, so we need our own ideas, but we have to have political muscle so that people who are on the fence come over to our side of the fence. People who are on that side, we have to replace them. There's no alternative that we can see. So vis-a-vis, should Secretary Clinton become President Clinton, we need to find some champions in Congress who put it forward and make it clear that if we have to pass $15 15 times and force Paul Ryan to be against it, presumably they will pay a price for that in the 2018 elections. Just as even though the right lost on the stimulus, on the bailout, on Obamacare, by the time we got to the election of 2010, they owned the narrative. And our side, insofar as not everybody's, this is a nonpartisan room, I know that. But if it weren't a nonpartisan, anyway, so you cannot separate good economics from good politics. You need both.
Do you think that there are other issues, hunger, rent and housing? What are some of the other issues that could be effectively linked to the minimum wage to do what we're trying to do here, which is put a human face on it? The hunger, obviously, that was the topic of your paper, but does anything else come to mind?
Child care is not
The
just-
Child care.
Yeah.
The rent.
Yeah, one of my fellow colleagues here, Julie Cashin, we were working about, like, last summer at this time on trying to come up with some proposals to expand child care subsidies. And one portion of that proposal was to also increase the wages of child care teachers.
So there is a research opportunity similar to what you did with hunger and the minimum wage, to child care and minimum wage, and I would imagine then to rent, rising rent. I mean, at some point you can't ask the minimum wage to do too many things. It just won't. But it's a good way to illustrate illustrate the impacts of that.
That's right. Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I think there are some other data sets. I think it's not the Survey of Consumer Finance, but the Survey of Income Participation, or they call it the SIP, that I think that has more of these outcomes that one could begin to look at. But I think one of the next steps for me, I want to sort of link the minimum wage increases to ALICE. Because there, ALICE is that work, we do talk about the whole budget. We talk about food, we talk about child care, we talk about health insurance, we talk about transportation, right? All these different very important outcomes that if ALICE has challenges with transportation, right, then they can't get to work, right? And that feeds into all these other issues and back to food security.
And I've long argued that hunger advocates have been a little too myopic just looking at hunger programs. So the '94 budget that Bill Clinton pushed had the biggest increase in SNAP food stamps in decades. There were some big cuts in welfare reform. Then the stimulus package had big increases. That was cut back again. But the truth is we've been relatively sort of okay, even though there have been $14 billion in cuts in SNAP over the last 5 years, compared to other things, relatively good in preserving these programs. But housing's just been decimated. Right. So if in any given year we succeed in getting $1 billion more in SNAP, big victory. But housing is basically $5 billion less. Folks like Flavia have $4 billion left to spend on food and housing, and it's one household budget. They don't look at it as these individual programs. So unless we look at the bigger picture, and also progressives have this myth of the magic exception. Hunger programs are so good, they'll be exempt from these cuts. But if that was ever true, it's not true under the current budget laws. And unless we fight for more revenue in the budget, more taxes on the wealthiest, we're never going to succeed in getting our little slivers of the pie enough to really reduce these problems. We need a fundamental restructuring of our economy. And the way you mentioned, Denmark, has $20 an hour. They used to have massive hunger. That's why there's so many Scandinavians in the Midwest. They were really poor parts of Europe. Right. And these parts of the world have basically eliminated hunger, dramatically reduced poverty because they changed their policies, not because human nature or the laws of economics changed.
Yeah, and I think when we pose or we engage in the debates and we say we can't, and we join in the chorus of we can't afford it, we've just lopped off, one of our appendages. And that we have to, borrow from my school board days, it's about developing what's the budget of need, and building the case for the budget of need, and doing a few white papers here or there.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm for it.
But I go back. I begin doing this work when my first times was testifying or being a part of something that Senator Kennedy did. And this, when I was riding in on the train that I was thinking about Andy, this is the panel that Ted Kennedy would do. You have the study, and you have Flavia in terms of describing and telling your experiences, and then we have our advocacy individuals, and it's about, and now with technology and we have to also then use the drumbeat approach that we have to also figure out how we can talk to and influence different stakeholders. I mean, one of the things that we did when I first began to get involved with United Way back in Williamsburg, Virginia, and this wasn't even public policy. We had some board members who had connections to some of our local businesses, and we had someone who one of our board members was head of Health and Human Services. We got a confidential list of folks who were utilizing Williamsburg's social health and human services support, and we noticed, they work for Colonial Williamsburg, they work for the College of William and Mary, they work for Anheuser-Busch. They're on our board. We had and that was the Southern way of doing it. We had a cool private conversation about that basically we need to you all need to do a better job in terms of how you're compensating your employees.
Well, there's been a lot of private firms that have.
But that was a very private, but underground way of still getting the same outcome. So I think it just depends. A lot depends upon the communities in which you live in at the local level. And just my last comment, I remember I was sort of came of age with Tip O'Neill saying all politics is local. Sort of building on sort of what President Clinton had said. I like now to say all economics is local, and that's where we are today. It's all local. And then many of you are old enough to remember the Fram oil filter commercial. And this is just agreeing with my colleagues here. Is that he was suggested you need to change your air filter so you won't have cost or expenses in the future. And the technician said, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And that's where we are today.
Mm-hmm. Can I say something?
Yes.
So just I want them to make a view about the low pay that we got. From the salary that I get, pay rent, pay electrician, pay phone bill, buy food, pay taxes, okay, from that little wage that I got. So paying taxes, I help the government and I help the city. Why they can't help me back? That's why I say, for that little money, I pay taxes and I do my right things. So it's still not enough for the people getting low wage. That's why we needed 15. Even the people who had $20 an hour, they had to pay taxes, they had to pay rent, still not enough. Thank you.
I'd like you to moderate one of the debates.
I would like to open it up for questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand in the back here.
Thank you. You sort of started to bring it out of just not the two linked things of a living wage. And for people who have looked at it, no, even the $15 is way too low if we had had constant readjustments. And people not being food insecure into other issues like housing. But the people in the political realm, certainly in the party dubbed the Blue Party, will send around polls of, is your interest in ensuring that you have breathable air and drinkable water or ending childhood poverty or something like that? Why these are idiots with these Solomonic choices that they give you, which all you could do is delete them. How do you begin to approach the public? We have a number of things that we have to deal with. And there's a certain synergy in dealing with them. How do we approach a whole broad breadth of issues and not just the single issues on the loan, which we have to do, and to get those people who said, oh, no, you're only getting people dependent when, as it's been said, the people who are the most dependent are the people who are getting all the benefits going up to them.
Mm-hmm. Let me split it into two then. Would you take the question about...
Yeah, you need a political party. That's what politics is for, right? Politics is about how do we solve problems without recourse to violence. That's a good thing. And parties are supposed to represent a view. The problem of money in politics is so deep and distorting that we end up with very narrow things. Remember, elections is just like you do what it is to win, but parties, unfortunately, in our country don't have coherent worldviews. The Republicans kind of do. It's incoherent, but it's united. But that's what organizing in politics is all about, is having a broad worldview so that you know, even if you're not talking about just one thing, that you represent a whole set of impulses.
I just say, my judgment, successful social movements have done three things: mobilize the people most impacted, switch people in the middle, and marginalize the opposition. And we spend a lot of time trying to convince the opposition when I think they just need to be defeated. Some in this new crowd, they're just the heirs of George Wallace, and we're not going to convince them. They just need to be defeated. We do need to convince the people in the middle, the Staten Island row house, owners, etc. But first and foremost, we need to mobilize the people most affected. There's no, and I got to tell you, God's honest truth, I said the same thing when the first strike for 15. Oh, this is crazy.
They're calling us crazy.
I've never been happier in my life to be wrong. And my staff's going, he said he's wrong? Never been happier, than that. And this idea in the hunger movement that somehow upper middle class white people are going to feel guilty and then raise their own taxes, it's preposterous. So we organize a thing called Food Action Boards. Philomena's here, she organizes them. We go to pantries and kitchens, we organize people to go to Albany, testify before commissions, talk to media, and low-income people absolutely have to be in the lead of this movement, not to wait for other people to wake up and go, oh, we feel guilty, because it's not going to happen. As Frederick Douglass says, power never concedes itself willingly, it never has, never will. We need to force this to happen. And then all the other justifications somehow will magically fix themselves. If Tom DeLay found a way to create the greatest entitlement program, this big corporate welfare for pharmaceutical companies, the biggest new entitlement program in decades, somehow we can find a way to solve this problem. Which, by the way, hunger saps our economy $167 billion a year. I've calculated we could fix it for 35. The common sense of this is a no-brainer. It's the politics that's broken.
Yeah, and then one of the things that we've done with our Alice work, and then to this day I see this table in our reports where as I said, we take each budget line, but then we have two columns, just simple two columns. First column is what is the impact of low income on Alice, right? But the next column is the key column really for us, and it's for our helping to increase our donors. In terms of their times and talent, but also their donations. And we say, what's the impact on everybody? What's the impact on everybody? And so we've developed that narrative to help people, that suburban mom, soccer mom, or soccer dad, to understand that this is not something that is like 7 degrees of separation, right? That in their daily life, that's something I've been trying to get us to do, is also call it an Alice inventory. Start from your day, when you leave your door, and to when you come home. How many interactions have you had with Alice? And so I'm agreeing with my colleagues here, but it's also, helping those who are those people who are trying to change their mind, but usually it's educating them, but helping them make that touch that it is real to them. And we've had some decent success with our volunteer and donor using this framework, talking about how these budget items, they don't just affect you. They you have a young child in Newark. They affect the kid out in Somerset County, or a family out in Somerset County.
I'll go on this side. Yeah.
I have a question for Professor Rodgers. Thank you. You made reference to data that's showing that the sky is not going to fall at $15. Does that data show any tipping point? Is it $17 or $22? Is there a tipping point?
I don't know one off the top of my head. I don't believe we have that evidence. I mean, I think where the liberal economists tend to sort of begin to separate, where some are 4.15 and others will only say, I'm okay with 12. That decision is really made on past studies that have looked at estimated job effects for that range of minimum wages that we see implemented, and that seems to be if you will, to use your language, the tipping point is do we have studies? Are we looking at studies where we have actual? But now with increasing number of municipalities and states going to 15, we'll have those with that direct evidence. So we're not simulating or trying to make predictions. Yeah.
Back here. In the corner there.
Hi, thank you everybody for coming. I live on Staten Island, and my name is Barbara Hart, and I'm on Joel's team with FAB, and I have this thing that I fight with Barbara Jr. like almost every day about. She tells me, Mommy, I'm supposed to be eating like 6 times a day and make sure I have fruits and vegetables, and it's really, really hard to explain to her about the con edison and the things that the young lady on the panel was saying, and it makes me like my heart just drop because I become angry when I shouldn't become angry. I should be able to explain it to her in a reasonable manner, but it's kind of difficult because she's only a child, So I'm one of the people that goes up to Albany. I'm one of the people that goes to Chicago. I'm one of the people that fight. Anytime Philomena say, let's go, Barbara, I'm there, you know, because it's important for people who don't speak up for themselves. And I have that in my community. You know, some of the people are scared to come to the pantries or to ask for help because they don't have a green card or something is going on. And, you know, my thing is that if I can have it my way, I will make sure that everybody who's not rich will have food stamps in their house, so they don't have to worry about food. And it's something that we all must have, because how are we going to keep this economy going if we can't even eat properly? It's not about just eating. It's about eating nutritiously. Because if we're just eating, we could fall out. But if we eat nutritiously, we can build and we can grow.
We're gonna go for you. We're
I
gonna go
think
fight for you.
That's one of the points in your paper, though, too, is that it's not only that they can buy more food, but they buy
Better food.
but they buy more nutritious food. So, you
That results is forthcoming. This piece just focuses on food security, and I think you can sort of tease it out from some of by looking at the 18 questions. But I do actually have some preliminary analysis that I'm looking at actual expenditures in the data set, and I am getting a result that's, you know, I'm hoping that it'll hold, but that is states where the minimum wage is slightly higher than the federal. I do see expenditures on fast food is actually lower than states where the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, is the binding one. And then I also see, conversely, this is where I'm looking for consistencies. I'm seeing that just expenditures on regular groceries do seem to be higher in those states where the minimum wage is set by the state and is slightly higher. So I think there is some evidence, I'm seeing, and I'll call it preliminary evidence, that is consistent with not only are we seeing the individual questions suggesting improvement in being able to buy nutritious foods, but even some actual evidence in the analysis.
Hi, thank you all very much. Beyond the push to raise the minimum wage to 15 or to some threshold, should there also be a push to then link the minimum wage to consumer price index or some kind of an index so there's an automatic increase from there on out?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there a push? Is that an active campaign? Because I hear a lot about the fight for 15, but I haven't heard nearly as much about that.
Certainly at the legislature, many of us thought at the state level to get that built into state law. We failed for this round to do that, but many of us have been pushing for that.
let me bring this up.
They always want you to come back and have to beg them again. So that's
Yes,
why you
they
just
wanna keep
lose
the
on
power.
politics. Nobody makes the argument, well, it shouldn't be indexed. But if they give it to you automatically, then you can go ask for something else. And so they want, it's really just.
And they can't take credit at a later point again.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
That's okay. I've looked at this as well, and I like the idea of indexing it to wages or inflation, whichever is higher. And the idea of indexing it to the increase in wages is that it's not enough for a wage just to keep up with inflation, because if we go 20 years and you're able to buy what you could have bought 20 years ago, you're not really staying even with the economy if the middle class and the upper class have been really getting real raises. So I think it would be good, and usually wage inflation is a little higher than price inflation, but just because you can have these weird inversions, I think it would be great if somebody said, look, every year we've got computers, it's not going to be hard to figure this out. We're going to raise the minimum wage either by inflation in wages or inflation in prices, whichever is higher. And then in the words of one of the economists at the Economic Policy Institute, they said, fix it and forget it. Get it up to the level it should be, and then index it properly, and then we don't have to go back and have this political argument you know, every 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
You know, every once in a while people call for an international minimum wage, which I actually think we need, because a McDonald's job isn't going to be shipped to Bangalore, but a call center job certainly could be. But it's been hung up that the living standards so dramatically different that how could you come up with one number? So in my new book, I actually propose an international minimum wage that's based on a formula that combines the median family income and the income of the top 20% of the society, and that we index it worldwide towards that, and that would also give the wealthy an incentive to raise wages for the lower income people if it goes along with their wages.
Well, Franklin Roosevelt proposed a maximum wage. That was a famous, famous idea back in the 1930s. Shouldn't be able to pay more. His was 10 times. The top guy in the firm shouldn't be allowed to earn more than 10 times the bottom. We're at like 350 now. But the idea was, you're going to go here, then this should go up too. I mean, it's and the nice thing about that is you get small business support, because there's no small businesses that have very few that have big income gaps. So that's part of that. Again, thinking politically here, we got to figure out how do we get the people who are sometimes dragged to the other side back on the side of justice.
Making it even.
You like that?
Making it even.
There's another question in the way back.
Hi, thanks. Some really great conversation. I'm a bit late to the talk, but my question is really about preparing for more economic volatility and how that's going to affect, food security and of course the minimum wage, because we hear a lot of executives and economists talking about, over the next decades expecting more volatility in the markets and in the economy. So how is that going to affect this conversation, and how do you prepare for it?
Looking at you.
Well, I just say, certainly you preserve the counter-cyclical nature of entitlements such as SNAP and school lunch and school breakfast that increase as the economy gets worse.
Well, unemployment.
Unemployment, you should be, we shouldn't have to beg for more money for that every year. The WIC program is the only major federal nutrition assistance program that's not an entitlement. It should be, but frankly, these claims of big business leaders that are paying themselves billions of dollars a year and hedge funds are millions of dollars a year, that if there's, a 0.0002% decrease in the GDP or something, they can no longer afford to pay their workers, a living wage, I find a little hard to stomach. Out of all their excuses for not supporting everything from worker safety legislation to higher wages, that they're really worried about their workers, I'd have a little less disdain for them if they were a little more honest that they wanted a fifth vacation home instead of that they were really worried about the Flavias of the world.
But I say, if every single person get $15 an hour, it's more people going to go to work and more people going to pay taxes, and we're going to help the economy. More better salary we have, better life, better taxes we pay, and help the economy to grow. With this little wage, it's not going to be enough.
I think to further answer your question, I think I think about it in two ways. One is the United Nations has this wonderful term they call human priority investments, and it's basically, you can think of it in two broad categories: investments in human capital, so education and training, but also investments in social capital, where social capital now is talking about community development. But it's also talking about social insurance, right? And I've done a little bit of analysis looking at what's happened to our investments in human priorities. And we've had two slowdowns of investments in human priorities. That is, in terms of a prediction of where we should be, and then where we actually are. And the two periods that we've had this slowdown has been during the 1980s, and the period from 2001, you know where I'm going, and the period from 2001 to 2007. And those also are key periods when what did we see? Growth in income, surges in income inequality. All right. We are doing everything, our public policy is doing everything possible it can to create a third surge in income inequality. I've been tracking as a share of GDP. We have been for the last few years below where you would predict we would be in terms of our human priority investments. So embedded in that is investing in education and training. That's your hedge in the long term. But the social capital, that's making and helping communities be resilient. And some other work that I've been talking about, I've sort of like to think, or have developed this notion that we've moved to what I call an a la carte society, right? That no longer can you buy the menu, or most of us, or more and more people are unable to buy the menu. That is being able to have the income to purchase good schools for your kids, to be able to purchase a safe neighborhood, right? To be able to purchase a healthy health insurance so your family will be healthy. That more and more of us now, in the way things have been decoupled, it's about the a la carte. You know, I'll buy a little of this, I'll buy a little of that. How can you participate in the a la carte society? You got to have the income. And what has happened is many communities have now become much less resilient to just simple things like natural disasters. Right? I mean, you know, Superstorm Sandy, the flooding we see annually. Right? So for me, to try to answer your question in the back, it's really about focusing on reinvesting, strengthening our investments in human priorities, and stop this sort of deferred maintenance, basically. And embedded in that is infrastructure, investing in infrastructure.
I think it's about time. Thank you very much for coming, and I want to say I'm very honored to have moderated this panel and to be asked to do this. It's really been a great discussion. Nice to meet all of you. Thank you to the audience.
Everyone at TCF, and thanks to all the staff and help for both Hunger Free America and TCF to put on tonight's event. We do invite you to stay and continue the conversation and come back to visit us here at TCF.
Thank you.
Thank you.